We all know someone like this. That person who has a complicated history with practically everyone who's ever been in their life. Friendships that lasted years end abruptly. Family members who were once close are now distant. And there's always an explanation. I realized they were toxic. I had to distance myself for my mental health. That person changed. Here's what makes this pattern so dangerous for those around them. When someone cuts people off repeatedly, you might be next in line without even realizing it. Psychologists and philosophers have studied this behavior for decades, and what they discovered is unsettling. That person who seems so loyal to you right now, who shares everything with you, who calls you their best friend, they probably said the exact same things to the 5 people they no longer speak to. Understanding this pattern isn't about judgment. It's about protection. Because recognizing these signs early can save you from investing years in a relationship that might disappear overnight, over something you never saw coming. Think about the last time someone told you about their past friendships. Most people have a handful of stories, maybe a couple of relationships that faded naturally over time, or ended due to major life changes. But then there are those who speak about their social history, like they're narrating a war documentary. Every friendship has a dramatic ending. Every connection has a betrayal story. Every person from their past is now labeled with words like manipulative, fake, or energy draining. What strikes you first is how passionate they are when recounting these stories. They remember every detail of what went wrong, every slight, every disappointment. The way they describe it, you'd think each former friend committed an unforgivable crime. And here's where it gets interesting. When you hear one or two of these stories, you find yourself nodding along, thinking they must have been through some genuinely difficult situations. You might even feel protective of them, grateful that they trusted you enough to share their pain. But as time goes on, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. There's always a new person being added to the list. Someone who was their closest confidant last month is now dead to them. The coworker they couldn't stop praising suddenly becomes the villain in a new chapter of their ongoing saga. And each time, the story follows a similar script. They gave everything to the relationship. The other person turned out to be disappointing. They had no choice but to cut them off completely. Philosophers throughout history have explored the concept of perception versus reality. Plato's allegory of the cave suggests that what we perceive as truth is often just shadows on a wall, projections of our own limited understanding. When someone consistently sees betrayal in every relationship, we have to wonder whose shadow we're really looking at. Are all these people truly toxic? Or is there something in the way this person interprets human behavior that turns normal imperfections into deal breakers? Psychologists call this phenomenon a pattern of unstable relationships, and it's more revealing than most people realize. See, maintaining long-term connections requires something that goes beyond initial excitement and good intentions. It demands the ability to tolerate discomfort, to sit with disappointment without immediately abandoning ship, to recognize that people are complex and contradictory. When someone lacks this capacity, they end up living in a perpetual cycle of idealization followed by devaluation. The idealization phase is intoxicating. They make you feel like you're the most important person in their world. They share secrets, make plans for the future, create inside jokes. You become convinced that this friendship or relationship is different from anything you've experienced before. And it is different, but not in the way you think. What makes it different is how quickly it can all disappear. The devaluation comes suddenly, often triggered by something that seems minor to outside observers. Maybe you forgot to reply to a message quickly enough. Perhaps you made plans with someone else without checking with them first. Or you expressed a different opinion on something they felt strongly about. Whatever the trigger, the response is disproportionate. Suddenly you're not who they thought you were. The pedestal crumbles, and you find yourself cast as just another disappointing character in their ever-growing collection of failed relationships. What makes this pattern particularly dangerous is how it normalizes emotional extremes. In healthy relationships, people experience ups and downs, frustrations and reconciliations. They learn to communicate through difficulties, to forgive minor transgressions, to accept that nobody can meet all their needs all the time. But for the collector of ex-relationships, there's no middle ground. You're either perfect or you're out. There's no room for human error, no space for growth, no possibility of working through conflict. The tragedy here isn't just in the number of relationships lost. It's in what gets lost within the person doing the cutting. Each time they eliminate someone from their life without processing what really happened, without examining their own role in the dynamic, they lose an opportunity for self-awareness. They reinforce a narrative that protects their ego but prevents genuine connection. And so they move forward, convinced that the problem always lies with other people, never stopping to consider that the common denominator in all these failed relationships is themselves. This realization brings us to an uncomfortable truth. The person who has cut off everyone isn't necessarily a bad person. They might be suffering from deep wounds they've never addressed, operating from a place of fear they don't even recognize. But understanding the reasons behind their behavior doesn't change the impact it has on those who get caught in their pattern. And that's precisely why we need to pay attention to these warning signs. One thing becomes crystal clear when you observe these patterns long enough. There's always a narrative being constructed, and in that narrative, the person doing the cutting is perpetually the victim. They never just drifted apart from someone. They were betrayed. They never had a simple disagreement. They were attacked. They never made mistakes that contributed to a relationship's end. They were taken advantage of by someone who turned out to be unworthy of their trust. Listen carefully to how they tell their stories. Notice the language they use. Other people are always acting against them, never simply living their own lives and making their own choices. Former friends didn't just move on or prioritize different things. They abandoned them. Family members didn't have different perspectives or boundaries. They were being controlling or unsupportive. The entire world seems to be conspiring to disappoint them, while they remain the noble figure trying their best in a sea of difficult people. Carl Jung spoke extensively about the shadow self, the parts of our personality we refuse to acknowledge or integrate. He believed that what we can't accept in ourselves, we project onto others. When someone consistently identifies problems in everyone around them, while maintaining a spotless self-image, they're engaging in massive projection. The traits they despise in others are often the very traits they harbor but refuse to see in themselves. This creates a fascinating psychological loop. The more relationships they destroy, the more evidence they collect that people are unreliable. The more people they cut off, the more justified they feel in their worldview. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. They expect betrayal, so they interpret ambiguous situations as betrayal. They anticipate disappointment, so they remain hypervigilant for any sign that someone is letting them down. And eventually, they find what they're looking for, because we always do. What's particularly exhausting about this dynamic is the impossibility of meeting their standards. You find yourself walking on eggshells, constantly worried about saying or doing the wrong thing. You start censoring yourself, measuring your words, calculating whether your actions might be misinterpreted. The relationship stops being a place of comfort and becomes a minefield where one wrong step could trigger total destruction. But here's what most people don't realize until it's too late. No matter how careful you are, you will eventually fall short, because the standards aren't actually about your behavior. They're about an internal wound that has nothing to do with you. That wound creates an insatiable need for validation, combined with an inability to trust that validation when it's given. So they test you, consciously or unconsciously, waiting for you to prove that you're just like everyone else who disappointed them. Psychology research shows that people with this pattern often experienced early attachment disruptions. Maybe they had caregivers who were inconsistent, sometimes loving and sometimes cruel. Perhaps they learned that people who claim to care about you can also hurt you deeply. These early experiences created a template for how they understand relationships. But instead of working through that template in therapy or through genuine self-reflection, they keep replaying it with new people, hoping for a different outcome while ensuring through their own behavior that the outcome remains the same. The refusal to acknowledge personal responsibility is perhaps the most telling aspect of this pattern. In any relationship that ends, Both parties typically contribute something to the breakdown. Maybe one person wasn't communicating clearly while the other wasn't listening. Perhaps one had unrealistic expectations while the other wasn't setting appropriate boundaries. Healthy individuals can look back at failed relationships and identify what they could have done differently. They might say things like, "I wish I had spoken up sooner," or "I should have paid more attention to the warning signs." They take ownership of their part without absorbing all the blame. But for those who cut everyone off, there's never a moment of self-examination. The narrative is always about what was done to them, never what they did or didn't do. This inability to hold complexity, to sit with the uncomfortable reality that they might have played a role in the relationship's failure, keeps them trapped in an endless cycle. They can't learn from their mistakes if they never admit to making any. And so the pattern continues. New people enter their lives full of hope and good intentions. These new relationships feel promising at first, exciting even, but underneath the surface, the same dynamics are already in motion. The same unrealistic expectations are being set. The same inability to tolerate disappointment is waiting to be triggered. The same ending is being written before the story has barely begun. Understanding this helps us see that being cut off by such a person isn't actually about our worth or our actions. It's about a pattern that existed long before we arrived and will continue long after we're gone. In the beginning, their loyalty feels unlike anything you've experienced. They're all in, completely devoted, treating you like you're the most important person in their universe. They text you constantly, want to spend every free moment together, share their deepest secrets within weeks of knowing you. It feels special, chosen, like you finally found someone who truly gets you. They make grand declarations about how different you are from everyone else, how you're the real friend they've been waiting for, how lucky they are to have found you. This intensity can be intoxicating, especially if you've been through periods of loneliness or struggled to form deep connections. Finally, someone sees your value. Finally, someone is as invested in the friendship as you are. Finally, you matter to someone as much as they matter to you. The problem is that this isn't actually loyalty, it's infatuation, the relationship equivalent of a sugar rush. And like all sugar rushes, it crashes hard. Aristotle distinguished between 3 types of friendship: those based on utility, those based on pleasure, and those based on virtue. He argued that only friendships grounded in virtue, in genuine appreciation of each other's character, could endure over time. The other 2 types are inherently temporary, because they depend on circumstances that inevitably change. When someone offers immediate, intense loyalty without taking time to truly know you, they're operating from the first 2 categories. They're attached to how you make them feel or what you provide, not to who you actually are. Real loyalty is built slowly. It's constructed through shared experiences, through seeing each other at your worst and choosing to stay anyway, through conflicts that get resolved rather than relationships that get discarded. It requires time to develop because it's based on genuine knowledge of another person, including their flaws and limitations. When someone claims deep loyalty after knowing you for a short time, they're not being loyal to you. They're being loyal to their idea of you, to the role they've assigned you in their life story. This explains why the crash comes so suddenly and completely. You didn't actually change. You were always the same person with the same flaws and limitations. What changed is that they finally saw past their initial projection and recognized that you're human. The person they were so devoted to never really existed. That person was a fantasy, a placeholder, an idealized version that couldn't possibly live up to reality. And when reality intrudes, as it always does, their loyalty evaporates. The shift is jarring. One day you're their person, the next day you barely exist to them. There's no gradual cooling off, no gentle distancing, no honest conversation about changing dynamics. Instead, there's a sudden drop from intimate connection to complete absence. Messages go unanswered. Plans get canceled. When you do interact, you can feel the wall that's gone up between you. The warmth is gone, replaced by coolness or outright hostility. And you're left wondering what you did wrong. replaying conversations and analyzing your behavior, trying to identify the moment everything fell apart. But here's what you need to understand. That moment probably wasn't as significant as you think. Maybe you disagreed with them about something minor. Perhaps you weren't available when they wanted you to be, or you showed enthusiasm for someone else they felt competitive with. The specific trigger almost doesn't matter, because any trigger would have eventually done the job. The relationship was always going to end this way, because it was built on an unstable foundation from the start. Psychologists who study attachment styles have found that some people oscillate between desperate closeness and complete withdrawal. They crave intimacy but fear it at the same time. So they rush into relationships with overwhelming intensity, trying to fill a void inside themselves. But as soon as real intimacy develops, as soon as they become vulnerable enough that rejection would actually hurt, their fear kicks in. They need to reject before they can be rejected. They need to leave before they can be abandoned. So they find reasons, create distance, and convince themselves that the other person was the problem all along. This pattern leaves a wake of confused and hurt people behind. You gave your trust to someone who seemed so certain about you. You opened up because they opened up first. You invested because they seemed so invested. And now you're left holding all that emotional weight while they've moved on to their next intense connection, probably saying the same things to someone new that they once said to you. The cycle repeats, and each time it does, both the person cutting others off and the people being cut off pay a price. What makes this particularly painful is the gaslighting that often accompanies it. If you try to address what's happening, to understand why things changed so drastically, you're likely to be told that you're too sensitive, too demanding, too needy. The very person who pursued you with overwhelming intensity now acts like you're the one who wanted too much. They rewrite history to fit their current narrative, conveniently forgetting all the promises they made, all the future plans they initiated, all the depth they claim to feel. If you feel ready to explore your inner world on a deeper level, to reconnect with the parts of yourself you've ignored or forgotten, take a look at the SIM Method ebook. It's a short, practical guide designed to help you balance your shadow and your light in just a few minutes a day. You'll find the link in the first pinned comment below. When you first meet them, the red flags are disguised as green ones. They bond with you quickly over shared complaints about other people. They tell you dramatic stories about past betrayals, and you feel sympathy rather than suspicion. They seem refreshingly honest about their standards and boundaries. They appear strong and self-assured, unwilling to tolerate poor treatment. Everything that should warn you away instead draws you closer. The stories they tell about former friends sound reasonable at first. They explain how someone betrayed their trust, how they gave chance after chance before finally walking away, how they tried to make things work but the other person just wouldn't change. You find yourself nodding along, thinking about your own experiences with difficult people, feeling grateful that this person knows their worth and doesn't settle for less. You don't realize that you're hearing their version of events, carefully curated to paint themselves in the best possible light. Nobody warns us to be cautious of people who seem too ready to cut others off. In fact, our culture often celebrates this behavior. We're told to eliminate toxic people from our lives, to protect our energy, to prioritize our mental health above all else. These are valuable messages when applied with wisdom and discernment, but they become dangerous when someone uses them as justification for never having to work through conflict, never having to examine their own behavior, never having to extend grace to others. The pattern becomes visible only in retrospect. You start noticing that every few months there's a new person being phased out of their life. You hear about another falling out, another relationship that didn't work out, another person who disappointed them. Each story individually seems justified, but when you step back and look at the collection of stories together, a different picture emerges. The common thread isn't that they keep encountering terrible people. The common thread is that they keep finding reasons to view people as terrible. Friedrich Nietzsche warned about becoming the monster you fight. When someone spends their life defending against betrayal, They often become incapable of trusting anyone, which ultimately guarantees the isolation they feared. Their hypervigilance for signs of disloyalty makes them interpret neutral behaviors as hostile. Their need to protect themselves prevents them from taking the emotional risks that real connection requires. They end up creating the very abandonment they're trying to avoid. Social psychology research reveals that our expectations shape our reality more than we'd like to admit. If you expect people to betray you, you'll interpret ambiguous situations as betrayals. If you believe everyone eventually disappoints, you'll focus on disappointments while overlooking all the ways people show up for you. Your brain looks for evidence to confirm what you already believe, and it finds that evidence everywhere because it's filtered out everything that contradicts your worldview. This creates a tragic irony. The person who cuts everyone off is usually someone who desperately wants connection but has no idea how to maintain it. They're not actually protecting themselves by eliminating people from their lives. They're reinforcing a belief system that makes genuine connection impossible. Each relationship they end confirms their suspicion that people can't be trusted. Each person they cut off becomes more proof that they're better off alone. And so they continue the pattern, never recognizing that they're the architect of their own isolation. What makes this pattern particularly invisible at first is how selective they are about who they target. They're not difficult with everyone. In fact, they can be charming, fun, engaging with new people, or those they consider less important. The problems arise with people they've let get close, people who matter enough that their imperfections actually sting. This selectivity makes it easy to dismiss concerns. If they were really the problem, wouldn't they have issues with everyone? The answer is no. The issues arise specifically in contexts where vulnerability and intimacy are expected. You might notice how they talk about people behind their backs. Someone who was their close friend last month is now described with contempt. They share private information that person told them in confidence, now using it as evidence of why that person wasn't worth their time. They mock vulnerabilities that were shared in trust. This should alarm you, but instead you might feel flattered that they're confiding in you, sharing their real thoughts with you. You don't yet realize that this is probably how they'll talk about you someday. The pattern stays invisible because we want to believe the best about people we care about. We make excuses for behaviors that should concern us. We rationalize away warning signs. We tell ourselves that this time is different, that we're different, that we won't make the same mistakes their former friends made. We believe we're special enough to break the pattern, and by the time we realize we're not special, that we're just the next person in a long line of people who thought they were different, we're already emotionally invested, and the cut is already happening. Understanding this pattern means recognizing it before you're in too deep. It means paying attention when someone has nothing good to say about anyone from their past. It means questioning why someone bonds so intensely so quickly. It means being wary of someone who frames every ended relationship as the other person's fault. These aren't absolute rules, and context matters. But when you see multiple indicators together, when the pattern becomes clear, you owe it to yourself to proceed with caution rather than rushing headfirst into a dynamic that's probably going to end the same way all their other relationships have ended. Emotional maturity shows up in how people handle disappointment. When someone lets you down, a mature response involves feelings of hurt or frustration, followed by reflection and communication. There might be a difficult conversation where both parties share their perspectives. There might be a decision to create different boundaries or adjust expectations. In serious cases, there might be a conscious choice to distance yourself while still acknowledging the complexity of the situation and your own role in whatever happened. What you don't see from emotionally mature people is the scorched earth approach. They don't burn bridges and salt the ground behind them. They don't erase people from existence as if years of connection meant nothing. They don't speak about former friends with pure contempt, reducing complex human beings to one-dimensional villains in their personal story. This difference isn't about being a pushover or tolerating genuine mistreatment. It's about having the emotional capacity to hold nuance. Mature individuals understand that people are multifaceted. Someone can be a good friend in many ways while also having traits that are difficult, or behaviors that hurt you. These contradictions don't negate the good parts, and the good parts don't excuse the harmful ones. Maturity means being able to hold both truths simultaneously. It means recognizing that ending a relationship doesn't require demonizing the other person. You can decide someone isn't right for your life without deciding they're a terrible human being. This capacity for nuance comes from secure attachment and genuine self-esteem. When you're secure in yourself, you don't need other people to be all good or all bad. You can handle the discomfort of acknowledging that someone who hurt you also cared about you, or that a relationship that ended poorly also had beautiful moments. You don't need to rewrite history to protect your ego, because your ego isn't so fragile that it requires protection from complexity. Buddhism teaches the concept of middle way, avoiding extremes in favor of balanced understanding. This applies directly to relationships. The extreme of tolerating any behavior, no matter how harmful, is unhealthy. But the opposite extreme of cutting people off at the first sign of imperfection is equally unhealthy. The middle way involves discernment. It means recognizing which behaviors are deal breakers and which are normal human flaws. It means knowing when to set boundaries and when to extend grace. It means understanding the difference between protecting yourself and punishing others. Emotionally mature people also take responsibility for their role in relationship dynamics. They can acknowledge when their expectations were unrealistic, when their communication was unclear, when their own wounds were triggered and they responded disproportionately. This doesn't mean taking all the blame or excusing harmful behavior from others. It means recognizing that relationships are co-created, and when something goes wrong, both parties usually contributed something to the breakdown. This self-awareness prevents the pattern of repeated relationship failures. When you can honestly examine what went wrong and identify your own contributions, you can make different choices in future relationships. You can recognize your triggers before they blow up a friendship. You can communicate your needs before resentment builds. You can address issues while they're still manageable instead of letting them accumulate until the only option feels like complete disconnection. Research in developmental psychology shows that emotional maturity includes the ability to regulate your emotions rather than being controlled by them. When you feel hurt or disappointed, you can sit with those feelings without immediately acting on them. You can take time to cool down, to think through the situation, to consider different perspectives. You don't make permanent decisions based on temporary emotions. This regulation is what allows for repair after conflict, for forgiveness after hurt, for reconnection after distance. People who cut everyone off lack this regulatory capacity. Their emotions overwhelm them, and they act impulsively to make the pain stop. Cutting someone off provides immediate relief from the discomfort of conflict or disappointment. But it's a short-term solution that creates long-term problems. Each time you eliminate someone rather than working through difficulties, you reinforce the pattern. You teach yourself that relationships are disposable, that people aren't worth the effort of understanding, that connection isn't valuable enough to fight for. Mature individuals also recognize that forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of resentment. This doesn't mean reconciling with everyone or allowing toxic people back into your life. It means releasing the bitterness that keeps you tied to past hurts. When someone cuts off everyone from their past and speaks about each person with lingering anger and contempt, they're still emotionally entangled with all those relationships. They haven't actually moved on. They've just created physical distance while maintaining psychological connection through resentment. The capacity to maintain long-term relationships requires accepting that people will sometimes disappoint you, that friendships go through seasons of closeness and distance, that love looks different in different phases of life. Maturity means understanding that a person who can't show up for you in one way might still be valuable in other ways. Your friend who's terrible at remembering birthdays might be the person who shows up without question when you're in crisis. Your family member who drives you crazy with their political views might also be someone who's been there for you through your darkest times. Recognizing these patterns doesn't mean becoming cynical or closed off. The goal isn't to protect yourself so thoroughly that you never risk connection. That would just turn you into another version of the person we've been discussing. Instead, protection comes from awareness combined with boundaries, from discernment without judgment, from caution that still leaves room for genuine connection. Start by observing how someone talks about their past relationships. Listen not just to what they say, but to how they say it. Do they speak about former friends with complexity and nuance, acknowledging both the good times and what went wrong? Or is every story one-dimensional, with them as the innocent victim and everyone else as the villain? Can they identify what they might have done differently? Or is every failure someone else's fault? The way people narrate their past often predicts how they'll eventually narrate their relationship with you. Pay attention to the speed at which someone wants to deepen the relationship. Genuine connection develops gradually, as trust is earned through consistent behavior over time. When someone rushes intimacy, sharing deep secrets immediately, or declaring you their best friend after a few conversations, it's often a sign of poor boundaries rather than genuine affection. Healthy people understand that closeness takes time. They're comfortable with relationships developing at a natural pace. Notice how they handle small disappointments. Before there are any major conflicts, there will be minor moments where expectations aren't met. Maybe you're late to meet up, or you forget something they mentioned, or you make plans with someone else. These small situations reveal whether someone can handle normal human imperfection, or whether they interpret every misstep as a betrayal. If they respond to minor issues with cold withdrawal or disproportionate anger, consider it a preview of how major issues will be handled. Set your own boundaries early and clearly. Don't get swept up in the intensity of a new friendship to the point where you abandon your other relationships or neglect your own needs. Maintain your existing connections. Keep your own life full and balanced. This serves two purposes. First, it prevents you from becoming overly dependent on one relationship. Second, it gives you information about whether this person can handle you having a life outside of them. Healthy people support your other connections. Unhealthy people feel threatened by them. Trust your instincts even when you can't articulate exactly what feels off. If something about the relationship feels intense in an uncomfortable way, if you find yourself anxious about their reactions, if you feel like you're walking on eggshells, don't ignore those feelings. Your intuition picks up on patterns and inconsistencies that your conscious mind hasn't fully processed yet. When something feels wrong, it usually is wrong, even if you can't immediately explain why. Be willing to have difficult conversations rather than avoiding conflict. One difference between healthy and unhealthy relationships is that healthy ones can survive disagreement. If you're afraid to express a different opinion or bring up something that bothered you, that's a problem. Test the waters with smaller issues before bigger ones arise. See if this person can hear feedback without becoming defensive or making you feel guilty for having needs. Their response will tell you whether this relationship has room for your authentic self. Recognize that you cannot fix or change this pattern in someone else. If you're in a relationship with someone who exhibits these behaviors, your choices are to accept the relationship as it is or to remove yourself from it. You cannot love them enough, be understanding enough, or be perfect enough to prevent them from eventually cutting you off. The pattern isn't about you. It existed before you and will continue after you. Trying to be the exception will only exhaust you. If you do get cut off, resist the urge to chase or to prove your worth. This is perhaps the hardest part because the sudden abandonment feels so unfair and confusing. You want explanations. You want them to understand your perspective. You want the relationship you thought you had. But engaging in that pursuit often leads to more pain. Someone who has decided to cut you off has already rewritten the story in their mind. Nothing you say will change that narrative. The kindest thing you can do for yourself is to accept the ending, feel your feelings about it, and then move forward. Learn from the experience without becoming bitter. Just because one person operated this way doesn't mean everyone will. Most people are capable of working through conflict, of extending grace, of maintaining relationships through ups and downs. Don't let one bad experience close your heart to future connections. Instead, use it as information that helps you recognize red flags earlier and set better boundaries going forward. Finally, examine your own patterns. Have you been on the other side of this dynamic? Have you cut people off quickly when they disappointed you? Do you struggle to maintain long-term friendships? Are your relationships intense and short-lived? Self-awareness is protective not just against others who might hurt you, but against the possibility of becoming someone who hurts others. We all have wounds and triggers. The question is whether we're doing the work to understand and heal them, or whether we're inflicting them on everyone who gets close to us. The balance between protection and openness is delicate. Close yourself off completely, and you guarantee loneliness. Open yourself up indiscriminately, and you guarantee hurt. The wisdom lies in learning to assess situations accurately, in trusting slowly while remaining hopeful, in protecting yourself without becoming hardened. This allows you to engage with life and relationships fully, while still maintaining the boundaries that keep you safe from people who aren't capable of cherishing the connection you offer.